I mean, there's a lot of concern out there right now that we'll see a resumption of hostilities. How concerned about that are you?
I'm extraordinarily concerned. I think that unfortunately, the ceasefire is very fragile. There have been incidents, practically speaking, on average every single night of some sort, including the use of heavy artillery from the side of the Russian-sponsored terrorists, and that artillery should have been moved back in accordance with the Minsk agreement. So I'm very concerned. I think Ukraine has borne an incredible burden in this war. We've had over 6,000 deaths, over 15,000 wounded. We have 1.1 million internally displaced people. This is one of the largest humanitarian crises in, I think, European history since World War II.
And how would a resumption of violence affect Kiev's financial position?
Well, as you probably are aware, we've already invested this year 5% of our GDP into our national security and law enforcement, so it's already a heavy burden on the budget. I would guess that further destruction, first and foremost, human life is the most critical. But the cost to the economy continues. We spend, on average, $5 million a day defending ourselves from an unprovoked aggression.
So the fourth quarter, if I remember correctly, contraction was close to 15%, right? And then industrial output contracted close to 20% in January and February. What should we expect in terms of the first quarter now that we're pretty close to the end of it, given the fact that some of the hostilities, we have the ceasefire now, but continued right into the first quarter?
Well, I think this first quarter has been very hard for us. It's a quarter that doesn't show any robust growth in that region in particular.
Yeah, sure.
In the occupied territory of Luhansk, for example, I think industrial production dropped 90%. So that's influencing the entire economy, of course.
So the fourth quarter was 15%, and that wasn't even including the GDP, yeah. That wasn't even including the separatist-controlled area, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, the occupied territories are included in the measurement because we're comparing year on year. And that falls out of the measurement when you compare back to 2013.
So do you think first quarter is going to be worse than the fourth quarter was?
No, I think it'll be around -7%, -10% overall for the economy. But we have a hard time even measuring, frankly speaking, the occupied territories. So it's hard to measure.
Yeah. And when you talk about we were talking about debt restructuring, I know, an escalation of the violence, very difficult to calculate what that would mean. But could you speak to what that would mean in terms of creditors and what they could expect if we get this resumption in violence, in terms of how your needs might change?
Well, God forbid, but I think what it changes is the macroeconomic forecast, the basis upon which the entire IMF program is built. The IMF program is built on a resumption of growth in 2016.
And no resumption in violence.
And no resumption in violence. And so that is one of those external shocks that I think all the creditors and all of our international support, all of our international partners need to take into account. It's one of the things why we need to build this cushion, why we need to strongly move forward in building this debt sustainability, because there are too many external shocks out of our control. So
when you talk to the creditors now, you explain to them that this is if there is no resumption of violence, and if there is a resumption of violence, do you say I'll come back to you with suggesting more of a haircut?
No. What I say is that they need to understand how important it is to accomplish this now, to give us the breathing space and to enable us to return to growth, given the potential for all those external shocks.
You've talked about the need for more financial assistance, right? You've just got this $40 billion package, not buttoned up, right? Because you've got the first tranche of the $17.5 billion, right? How much?
$5 billion.
You've got the $5 billion now, and you're in the process of getting bilateral aid together. How much more money does Ukraine need?
There's no magic number. I think this package.
But if you're going to ask for it, you got to have a number.
No, I don't, and I don't ask for a specific number. This package is enough, I believe, to stabilize the financial and monetary system, the banking system, which is critical. Nothing can happen in the real economy until we can stabilize the currency and the banking system. But above and beyond that, what we're looking for is investment funds. We're looking for credits that are investment-related, not fiscal, not monetary. And there is no amount there. What we can talk about today is that we have sectoral priorities, meaning agriculture, energy efficiency, infrastructure. But assume we have peace. And if we have peace, we're going to need to rebuild that disaster that you just showed of destruction in the occupied territory.
Do you have the money to pay for any of that reconstruction?
No, and that's why when I go and I talk to our partners, peace will require a certain amount of financial support as well.
Do you have any idea what a Marshall Plan, as people say, might cost for Ukraine?
No, until right now I can't tell you what the cost of the destruction is. I think you've seen more of it than I have. I have estimates of the pipelines that have been bombed and the airports that are missing and the infrastructure that's been destroyed, the apartment buildings, thousands of apartment buildings been damaged. But I don't have a good sense of what the cost of reconstruction would be.
In terms of, you mentioned stabilizing the currency, the hryvnia. It sort of was as much as 40 to the dollar, or 35, 40 to the dollar. It's strengthened to around 22 to the dollar right now. But there's a lot of pressure, right? There's a lot of capital controls that are in place that are keeping the hryvnia where it is. How much pressure, how confident are you that that 22 level is actually sustainable? Where could we see a further weakening, and how far could it go, given the constraints right now keeping it where it is, including the, 30% interest rates?
Yeah, I think that it's not so much keeping the hryvnia in control. These administrative controls that were implemented were really used to try and eliminate the speculation, the fraud that was being used to take capital out of the country in a very volatile fashion. I think where we are now is closer to the fundamental value, and I would expect that, assuming we can continue to move down the road of structural reforms that we've outlined in the IMF program, we should be able to stay within this zone. The IMF program shows that, assuming things go well, that we in the 22 to 24 over the next 4 years.
As you're confident you can stay between 22 and 24, that the hryvnia can for the next 4 years?
I'm confident if we do what's necessary to reform our economy that we can.
In terms of inflation, 27% is where we are now. Do you see that picking up?
No, I think it goes down over time, and we're suffering right now from the depreciation.
Right.
That's a huge part of the inflation. Raising household tariffs on gas, which is an absolute necessity to start removing the subsidies from our state oil and gas monopoly, Naftogaz, and instead provide them to the population. But that requires raising prices, eliminating the rent-seeking behavior that occurs when we have multiple prices in the marketplace. All of that will have a short-term effect on inflation, but we should be able to come back by 2016 to single digits.
When we talk about financial aid, and you're out there asking for more money right now, I mean, do you feel that Ukraine is, because of this geopolitical conflict playing out on your soil, better positioned to get aid than it might be otherwise? I don't mean to be flip about it, but do you feel that Western countries are happy to give you money because of the conflict that's going on in your country, and they just want to show solidarity?
First of all, I'd call it financial support, not aid, because most of it is credit,
right,
to be perfectly frank. There is a portion that's humanitarian aid, which is being given to help us with the humanitarian crisis. But the bulk of this is money we're borrowing and we repay.
Sure.
I don't think that any taxpayers give away their money or lend their money easily. So I think everyone has a certain amount of conditionality with regard to whether or not they want to provide us support. I think that from Ukraine's perspective, today more than ever we deserve that support.
Yeah.
Today more than ever the Ukrainian people are standing on the front lines defending those values that the Western world, that the free world has abided by and lived by, and that have inspired the free world for decades, if not centuries. We're standing for freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of media, sovereignty, territorial integrity. This is what post-World War II free world was built upon. And so today I think the Ukrainian people deserve that support, taken together with the fact that they are themselves reforming their own country.
And do you feel that, given the amount of financial assistance or loans that, say, Greece got, conversely, the sort of opposite of what I was just asking, you feel like you're getting shortchanged, that people have been, too reluctant to provide help?
I would say that we're grateful for what we've received, but there's
Sure.
no question I would hope for more, and I think the Ukrainian people deserve more. I think that when you look at it on a per capita basis with Greece, there is no comparison. The support for Ukraine has been much, much less.
Yeah.
So I
guess the issue with Greece is that Greece
more.
is part of the Eurozone, and there was a concern that Greece might exit the Eurozone, and you don't have that leverage, do you?
not that leveraged, but we certainly are standing on the border of a major aggressor who's attacked Europe.
Coming up now, in terms of returning to the sort of the future, if we get a resumption in violence, I guess the government forecast you just mentioned is somewhere between 5 and 7% for growth, for a contraction, excuse me, in 2015. If we get, like people say, we could see the rebels the separatists going after Mariupol, what would that mean for your economy in 2015?
I have confidence that Ukraine will defend itself, that our military is more prepared today than it ever has been, that we have the support, in particular of the UK, for example, with military advisors, with the US and other countries providing us with some training, with some non-lethal support.
But that's militarily.
So my
in
guess
terms of
is that militarily we will succeed in holding them back. And,
that comes at a cost in terms of obviously human lives and first and foremost, but also in terms of resources and potentially, not just a bad economic situation there, but throughout the country.
Well, the rest of the country, remember, this is 7% of our territory. The rest of the country is operating open for business. In fact, to some extent, attracting new investments. I sat with investors last night for dinner, and many talked about investment into the IT sector, into agriculture today. We've recently had a sale of our 3G licenses, attracted 3 new licensees for the 3G. So it's not as if this war is coloring the entire situation throughout the country. In fact, the rest of the country is very ready and very open for investment.
I walked into a store on March the 8th, which, as you know, is International Women's Day, and I asked what the most popular, beer was amongst the beers they had. This was outside of the separatist area, inside, if you will, Ukraine proper, which is a bad way of putting it, but near the city of Dnipropetrovsk, a little village. And the woman looked at me and said, deadpan, "None of them are popular. I'm not selling anything." She had just sold some chocolate that day. Is this, can you speak to me to the sort of chilling effect this has had on the Ukrainian economy, this conflict? At this point, I was 100 miles almost outside of the conflict zone.
It's not just the conflict. Ukraine is going through a recession. We're in the 9th or 10th quarter of recession, which started post-Lehman, in fact, in 2009. It's 23 years of incomplete reform, 70 years of communism, a regime, the last regime that left with a level of corruption that was beyond anything we had ever seen, and having put $40 billion of new debt on the shoulders. The Ukrainian economy is suffering not because of the war, but on top of the fact that there's a war. Consumer purchasing power is down, there's no question. But I don't believe that they're not selling beer. She might not have sold any that morning because the men were at home making lunch for their wives.
Yeah, of course they were. Of course they were.
But I don't think it's a question of not being able to sell beer.
And in terms of, we've got a story out today talking about the oligarch conflict that Ukraine faces. This is something I wanted to ask you about. There is a Ukrainian billionaire by the name of Igor Kolomoisky, you're obviously very well aware of, who has a minority stake in several government-controlled companies, also has a militia that is helping fight the pro-Russia separatists in the east of the country. But recently he rocked up at one specifically state-controlled enterprise with some of his men with guns. And we've heard the Ukrainian president talk about that we can't have private armies and regional armies in the country. What do you think about Mr. Kolomoisky's actions over the last week?
Well, I agree with the president that there's no role for these private armies. The government has moved day by day, month by month, to incorporate them into the National Guard, and that process will continue until it's complete. In terms of what's happening in Kiev, and I haven't been there for a few days as I've been on the road negotiating with creditors, it's my understanding that today the Minister of Internal Affairs will be ensuring that there are no private guards, nothing of any sort remains in Kiev. It remains at Ukrenaft, at the state company, and that law and order is first and foremost, primary.
Because you're keen to get, as a shareholder in those companies, the majority shareholder in, obviously, some of the dividends that he's been blocking, so that to help replenish the coffers, yeah?
Well, in general, we're taking on a huge state-owned enterprise reform process, which involves transparent choice of CEOs, access to the financial records, ensuring that corruption is brought to an end in our state-owned enterprises, and yes, that they provide some kind of fiscal support, taxes, dividends. They have a role to play. And then at the end, also taking a look at what we can privatize this year. So it's a much broader picture than just Mr. Kolomoisky or just Ukernafta.
You mentioned privatization. Mr. Kolomoisky raised the idea of nationalizing some assets that were already privatized. Any chance for that?
I don't think so. I think that's been a very bad thing in the past, and I think that the government has no desire, no intention to do that. It disrupts the market in a way that does not create confidence. And right now, our goal is to create confidence.
Natalie Jaresko, we wish you all of the best in your pursuits. Thank you very much.